the button. And I'll just...
Mark Taylor.
Spotlight myself. So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to my dining room, your living room, your shed, wherever you happen to be. It's great to see you all. I think I mentioned earlier, if you wouldn't mind putting your camera on, if that's okay. Even if you're in your pajamas, come on, we've all done it, because it's, for me and for the speakers and everyone else, it's much nicer to see happy smiling faces rather than a little screen with your name on it. So welcome to Rise and Design. My name's Terry McStay. Are we all enjoying the fabulous weather? Yeah, the unfashionably fabulous weather. I had my first foreign holiday of the decade recently. Well, I went to North Wales for the weekend, but you know what? I couldn't read the road signs. People were talking in a different language. I was abroad, and that's all there is to it. But it was fab. So I was doing a bit of a tour around Snowdonia, and I'm a bit of a salvage hunters fan. Give us a wave if you're a Drew Pritchard groupie. Mm-hmm. So I was staying in Colwyn Bay, and it's not a shop. His showroom is in Conwy, which is a beautiful place. If you're in North Wales and you've never been to Conwy, you should go. It's really lovely. But yes, so he's got his showroom there that you have to book an appointment. I saw up myself. It's unbelievable. And I went in, and it's just it's more of a museum than a shop. So he's got all these, like, there's a table with a rock on it, or a knackered old armchair with no cover on it, and then one thing he had was this. It was like this cast iron plinth about 1 metre square with a statue on it. Well, it used to have a statue on it. All that was left was 2 feet. It was almost like the statue had spontaneously combusted, and all was left with these 2 little feet. And he wanted like $3,000 for it or something. So I passed on that one, I must admit. But having said that, Julie Graham, brace yourself, this is a good one. Having said that, he was taking all of these things that would have been cast aside, that would have ended up in landfill, and he was kind of repurposing them, reusing them, giving them a new life. And so while he was making a bit of money out of it, he was doing his bit for the planet, which is something we've all got to do, really. Good.
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
I'm just going to put whoever that is on mute. I do apologise to whoever it is. But yeah, so he was doing his bit, and really we've all got to do our bit. If we think the last year's been rough, the next decade could be absolutely atrocious if we don't do something. And that's really what we're here to find out and learn a bit more about today, about this whole drive, this whole move that we've all got to make towards having a slightly less of an impact on the planet. So that's what we've got for you this morning. I'm just going to turn the projector on. There we go. So that's what we're going to be thinking and learning and hearing about today, Design for Net Zero. So, but first of all, can I just say a special welcome to those of you who are here for the first time. Can I just have a quick show of hands? Who's here at Rise and Design for the first time? Quite a few of you. Well, it's really good to see you. I hope this isn't the only time that you come. So we've been doing these Rise and Design events for nearly 12 years now, which is really scary. And they are... And this is why, because we as Design About North believe that great design can improve any product, service or business, and hopefully these events help to bring that to life, make it a reality for you, and thereby increase the impact that design can make to your business, your organisation, or even your life. Who knows? So we've had I think we've done about 130 of these events over the last 12 years, with and attracted 6,000 and odd delegates from a couple of thousand different businesses. We've heard from nearly 400 speakers who've come along and shared their knowledge and their expertise. Sadly, the Bacon Sarnie number hasn't gone up for almost 18 months, but hopefully that will start to change quite soon. But these are really good ways just to meet other people, and I do hope that you don't see it as something that as a webinar. This is very much an opportunity to connect with other people, and we'll try to help you to do that. It's an opportunity to share ideas, thoughts, problems, issues, projects, whatever. It's about learning from not just the people who are going to be presenting this morning, but the person that you end up chatting to in a breakout room could be that person who's got something that you need for your business. But it's also about hopefully giving you something you can take away and something that's going to make a difference to you going forward. So we've got some fabulous. Could I ask everyone to put themselves on mute, please, if you wouldn't mind, because it's. So we've got some fabulous speakers for you this morning. So we have Steve from Hyperdrive, who'll be talking about the drive to battery-powered moving around of things. And then Paula from Robert McAlpine, talking about issues around infrastructure and civil engineering and bridges and roads and all that good stuff. And then we have Alona, who's talking about the concept of, I can't remember what it's called, I'll let her explain. And then Colin Kelly from Mad Digital, talking about the digital aspects and the contribution that the digital world can make to all of that. So that's right, so welcome back everyone. Hopefully you've met someone amazing. If you didn't, then we'll have another go at this later, so juggle all the rooms around again. So that's enough from me. I'm delighted to welcome the first of our speakers, Steve Abbott from Hyperdrive. So I've known Steve for quite a while and seen something of the journey that the company's been on, and they were in the news last week, which I'm sure Steve is going to mention also, which is the next stage in their journey. So Steve, can I hand over to you?
Yeah. Should I don't know how to do this. Share screen. We usually use Teams. So if I share on there.
I'm glad it's not just me.
Hopefully you can see that. You probably see I use lots of notes, but I'll try and not be too.
We've got that, Steve, I think.
Have you got that?
Yeah.
Can you see that? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Perfect.
That's fine. Brilliant. Thanks, Steve.
So thanks for having.
Sorry, Steve, just before you start, if anyone's got any questions, just pop them in the chat as we go, and I'll invite you to ask Steve at the end. Is that okay? Right, sorry, Steve, over to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I think Terry's mentioned that I've kind of tended to dip in and out of Design Network, haven't I? So, but I am very thankful for the interventions that we've had and some of the companies that you've introduced us to. So hopefully I'll give you a little bit of a background on that. The main focus, so design for net zero. So what I was keen to talk about in terms of Hyperdrive is not necessarily Hyperdrive's kind of environmental credentials, more how Hyperdrive is an enabler for net zero. And in our case, it's about net or zero carbon transport or zero carbon machines, if you like. So if anyone's walked past, I don't know, a digger taking the kids on the way to school, or it's kind of those kind of diesel engines generate emissions that you breathe in. What we're trying to do is provide systems which mean that is an enabler for companies to move away from that technology. So and there's a whole host of factors driving that as well. A little bit about me. So I had a run through with a colleague yesterday, and he said, don't kind of forget to talk about yourself. So I'm not very good at talking about myself, but a little bit of background on me, which I guess is relevant to my role. So now I am business development. So I kind of apologize for being a salesman. I'll try not get too salesy in this presentation, but my background's also I actually did a industrial design and marketing degree, and I wasn't very good at the industrial design, so I dropped that, but I guess I'm trying to bring that back into my role now. So I'm interested in it without being very good necessarily at the kind of the drawing bit. And my role as business development manager is about generating new customers, but also importantly, as we've grown to be a bigger business, try and not lose the focus on new innovation and new product development, and also think about how we are servicing customers and how our service can improve over time. So hopefully I'm playing a bit of a role in that. I guess I like this network because it gets you out of the day job, and it does get you thinking. So that's why I guess I've kept involved. In terms of Hyperdrive, so I think more and more people are hearing about us, but we were set up in 2012. We moved to the site where we are at the moment in Washington and Sunderland in around about 2015, and that was at the time when I joined the company. So we, before my time joining the company, we were doing very much novel systems engineering, new vehicle development. So you'll see on the pictures there, you know, a 3-wheel electric car or a autonomous marine vessel which would survey the sea. Very kind of R&D, quite fun for the engineers to do, but not really any commercial future immediately. So when I joined the company, we were just starting a commercial project which was moving into production. So you'll see there the picture of the robot, which is for a very famous company, and it's really at the start of e-commerce. So this was a robot which worked in warehousing, delivering goods, could not be powered by the mains electricity, needed a portable battery on it. So we supplied that. They're our biggest customer and remain our biggest customer to this date, and very novel. We've not found another customer like that, but what we have done is we've developed a range of products which can be used in different applications. So you see a picture there of the JCB mini excavator. That was really the first project which went into production in the kind of off-highway vehicle world. And I guess I've been, in my 6.5 years at Hyperdrive, I've seen the transition from the company from a very creative, hands-on organization right through to becoming a lot more serious. And you know, when you move into mass production, this year we'll make 15,000 products. Each of those products, you know, is thousands of pounds. So you can't really do anything different. They need to be the same. They need to be high quality. So whilst we're growing the company from that respect, I guess my role is to try and keep the creativity and try and keep that kind of foresight and that innovation. So that's kind of why I get involved in things like this. In terms of the markets we're in, we're very lucky. We've got in early, and we're in some really interesting markets where the only way is up. It's almost for us to lose, which doesn't make it easy, but it's very kind of buoyant market. So you'll see on there that we are enabling customers to what we say, make the shift to low or zero carbon in the machines and in the vehicles they make. Whilst automotive does kind of hit the headlines, you know, we've got this target that no diesel petrol cars by 2030 will be sold. The batteries for cars tend to be taken by the OEMs, so whether that's Nissan or Jaguar Land Rover, they're tending to do it themselves. Where we come in is we're looking at everything else. So historically and to this current day, it's those markets that are on there. So it's robotics, automation, materials handling, forklift type applications. It's off-highway, it's construction, it's excavators, it's also things like portable generators. So we supply into companies who've got a history with those machines, and that means that they can move more quickly to providing a zero carbon or certainly a lower carbon product into the market. We've also got on there rail, so I'll talk a little bit about it later, but we've had we've won a new customer which takes us into a completely new world of rail, which is really exciting, and basically a reward for the stuff that we've been doing with other sectors. Big thing about what we do is it is high performance, so we're not trying to compete with more traditional battery lead acid type technology on forklifts. It really is high performance, which makes it premium, which means that we must continue to innovate. It's massively important for us to continue to innovate, to continue to kind of keep ahead or remain with what's a very kind of globally fast moving market. All of this, as we all know, is being driven by climate change, and it is happening. So we've got some really interesting customers. So we predominantly work with OEMs, so the people making the machines, you know, the JCBs of this world. But we do also work with some quite novel aftermarket companies. So one company in particular in the Netherlands, they take brand new big construction machines and they convert them. So they're brand new machines, they convert them and they sell them back into the market. I think it's 3 or 4 times the price. But the reason why there's a market is because the Dutch government are being very ambitious on zero carbon targets, and there's an incentive so they can get those machines into the market, so that when they're using them in canals or in city centres, they're not providing any emissions. So this is a bit of work we did. So as well as developing the technology, we're trying to keep ahead of the market and understand the market. So this bit of work here, if anyone wants the detail, just ask me, I can share the report. But this was a report on, we interviewed a host of people in the construction sector to find out what were the drivers in their market. So as well as the big government initiatives, it's such a big contributor to emissions. So I had a little look for some latest research. So the Technology Strategy Board say that the construction, operation and maintenance of the built environment accounts for 45% of total UK carbon emissions. So it's such a big factor. A lot of the customers that we've got now, and during the construction of a project, there's a big emphasis on reducing the emissions that go into that project. So that's kind of where we get involved in. And this is very, try not to get too much detail, but this is what we offer. So we incorporate new lithium-ion battery cells. We've developed the electronics or the battery management system, and we package it into a module, which means that that can be incorporated into applications like these quickly, swiftly, and also it enables companies who don't have the resources, don't have the expertise to buy in that expertise at an affordable rate. So one of the companies on there, you'll see top right, is Dennis Mowers. So I think they probably describe themselves as the kind of Rolls Royce of mowers. They've sold machines, I believe, for an upcoming World Cup, and they're used by all the professional football clubs around Europe. They were able to move to an electric machine, which is quieter, less vibration for the person using it, and doesn't give any emissions. And they're now launching those machines, and they're flying off the shelves, and they're expensive machines. More traditional companies, like you see the forklift with Cargo Tech. We've had a number of research projects and trials with Northern Power Grid, which there'll be a new project coming soon, and also some novel transport technologies. You'll see bottom left there, and autonomous vehicles, which are kind of starting to come through as well. And our role is very much an enabler for these technologies to provide certainly the battery pack or the energy storage, and possibly the full replacement for the engine, which is where the expertise is needed. This was us a couple of years ago with the JCB electric digger. We've changed quite a bit, and we've grown quite a bit. We're about 75 people at the moment, and growing quite quickly. We doubled turnover last year, so we're in a process of really quite rapid growth. My role in trying to keep us thinking ahead and thinking us to innovate, very much been helped by Design Network North and especially Octo Design. So we've had probably 2 or 3 projects with Octo Design. The first one was way back when we were looking at developing a universal or an off-the-shelf pack, which didn't really exist elsewhere, and really valuable work, just stepping back from the day-to-day business, looking at value proposition, looking at who's going to use it, why they're going to use it, is there a business case for this, how do you use more than one together, all those things that maybe when you're in the business and maybe when it's very much kind of dominated by engineers and not designers, we might not necessarily get to. What I find in terms of explaining to people internally about why we're doing this, so why am I dragging the engineers away from the day-to-day must-dos, is really to try and avoid this. So again, courtesy of Octo Design, who've kind of talked us through this process, it's really to avoid what happens at the end there. So if you don't fully understand what you're doing at the start, it's more expensive and it takes longer at the end. And we've certainly been guilty of that in the early days of just jumping into a new product development when really we should have stepped back and thought about it a bit more. What we're trying to do is, become a lot more like this, which is we do a lot of the thinking at the start, and that means that when we actually get into delivery, it should be a smoother process. So that's kind of where we are now in terms of looking at the roadmap going forward. What we're doing, so now we've got products, we've got customers we thought we would get, we're also getting new customers. So we never really thought about our current products being used in marine, and then this customer came along. And then that's moving quite quickly. So it is really stretching the current product, which means that we must look at new development and start looking further ahead. And this is another project that we've worked on with Octo, looking at innovation challenges. So improving the whole value offer, trying to match the performance of more powerful machines, bigger machines, avoiding restrictions on, climate, hot and cold countries, and also integrating our systems with many more different systems and machines. So that's an active project now that we're working on to really set the direction of our innovation. I'm going a little bit quick here because I'm conscious I'm over time, but the project that we're running at the moment is an innovation road mapping exercise. So this is something we started a couple of weeks ago. So you'll see there in the background lots of post-it notes, lots of ideas, but we really need to prioritize and group ideas together to take them forward so that we continue to innovate. Hence interest in the whole design thinking and the approach. In terms, at the same time, we've got big new customers. So in rail, we're working with Hitachi Rail. So they're looking at fully electric trains, possibly hundreds of them, which could work in Europe. And these are trains which would work where there's currently no overhead lines. So we still rely on diesel trains a lot in the UK, where there's gaps in the network. So these would be fully electric trains designed to fill those gaps. That's a development project of a number of years and hopefully going into production in the not too distant future. We also, I guess, based on everything I've explained and all of the projects we've got, we have been recently acquired by a company called Turntide. This was just in the news at the start of this week. It only happened a couple of weeks ago. Turntide's background is in built environment and energy efficiency, in heating, in farming, in air conditioning. So there's a really big new market there for us potentially, but also they've bought Hyperdrive because they're very interested in moving into commercial transportation, and they are backed by a host of different funds and essentially green capital ventures. They mentioned names like Jeff Bezos and also bizarrely Robert Downey Jr. is part of that entity as well. So that's interesting times. And then this morning there's stuff happening all the time, which is interesting. So these are not a customer, but this was just a news story that I heard at the start of the day. So really the future is happening. So this is a British company called Vertical Aerospace that have sold 500 electric aircraft to Virgin and American Airlines this morning. And these are describing them as aircraft taxis, and that they'll be flying around as early as 2024. So I've not spoken to this company, but yeah, one of my jobs for next week will be to try and speak to this company because there's so many different opportunities, so many new things happening. And that's it. Sorry, hope that was a lot of information. Hopefully it wasn't too much.
Thanks for that, Steve. That was brilliant. Could I ask you to? Sorry, you've stopped sharing the screen. So could we just thank Steve with a round of applause of jazz hands in the now usual manner? So Steve, do you think you're going to have a visit from Robert Downey Jr. anytime soon? And if you are, would you let us know so we can, peer over the fence?
Apparently he is very interested in, he's not just an investor, he is very interested. So I believe, I've not had a chance to look, I believe there is stuff on YouTube, if you look at Turntide and Robert Downey Jr., where he just appears in board meetings and things like that. So apparently he's more than just putting the money in, he's very interested in it. But yeah, I've not had any exposure to him or whether he comes in. But I did, yeah, he might be though, because I did hear Harrison Ford's in town, so maybe he'll.
Well, I was going to mention that because Yeah, because he was at the North Shields Fish Gate, I think, last week, wasn't he? Or
Was he?
Bamborough or somewhere. So yeah.
Yeah.
Hey,
So
we attract all the
Yeah.
big names, don't we?
Yeah. So, but I know the Turntide guys are very keen. They're familiar with the area anyway. They've also acquired another company in the area, so they're very familiar. They're very supportive of the Northeast and the engineering heritage and hopefully the future in the Northeast. So they're very keen to work with us.
Brilliant. So thanks for that, Steve. There aren't any questions posted in the chat. Does anyone have a question for Steve, or a comment or an observation? Julie?
And you missed me question.
Also, did I miss a question?
I did. I put a question in.
Oh, sorry, Yvonne, you did. Yes. Well,
Yes.
Yvonne, over to you, and then Julie, you can.
Oh no, sorry,
ask your
Julie.
question.
No, I was noticing, Steve, when you went through your clients, and maybe it was just that's how presentations are given. But there was lots of lovely, big, sexy corporate names, and I wondered, is there a difference between the sort of large international businesses and the smaller local businesses, really in their readiness to move to decarbonisation, electrification, whatever term we're using today?
Yeah, definitely. We've kind of built a group of customers. We've got 2 or 3 really big ones, and they're worth millions, if not becoming tens of millions to us. But we want to stay involved with a dozen or so other companies that we really like what they're doing. So Dennis Mowers was a good example. So family-run business, but really wanted to move quicker. So what we find is the smaller companies can move quicker if we enable them to. The bigger companies will dither a little bit, will take a lot more time, will probably ask for a lot more in terms of customization. But there are some really good smaller companies who are doing some really interesting things. So the electric boat is a company called RS Sailing, who are moving from essentially selling sailing boats over to these kind of electric rib boats, which have a whole host of applications. Dennis Mowers is a good one. The autonomous vehicle is a company called RDM. So we are very keen to support British businesses, and the British businesses tend to be the smaller businesses that need to evolve, otherwise they won't survive.
So you've managed to retain that kind of interest in just doing new things and figuring things out which is where you came from.
Hopefully, and it has kind of fallen a lot in terms of the sales team, that there is only 3 of us, and we all have our favorites, and we have got to push increasingly more and more. We have to push the business to do new things with smaller companies, because I think at a board level, they want more big companies. They want fewer customers, but more. But I think there's definitely an understanding, certainly at our level, that if we get involved, they can help us to enter these new markets as well. So working with a smaller company in marine could open the door to working with a much bigger company in marine, because we learn as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for that, everyone. Julie, you had a question.
Not so much a question. Firstly, thanks, Steve. I appreciate the shout out there for Octo. The last image you showed of the drone, the flying taxis, that's a massive market, and I just thought I'd mention it. It's it's called advanced air mobility. I think that's how it's termed, and the market itself just recently has secured or has been given $8 billion worth of investment, and that's taxis, air cargo. So it is a huge area to get into, and if you are looking at something like that, maybe we can get our heads together, because I've got a little bit of info on it. But yeah, great presentation.
I asked the business. I saw that news story this morning. We've always kept away from flying things, because we've had some kind of one-off kind of inventors saying that, but that just made me think this morning. I've asked the question of the directors this morning, do they want me to go and look into this market, because it is another new market for us potentially.
Thanks, Julie. Simon Hall, you had a question about retrofitting.
Hi there. Yeah, basically, petrol cars, household cars of what's in stock at the moment. So if you put a retrofit unit, so you essentially took the engine out, had a battery and motor, and bolted that straight onto the gearbox, then that produced at scale would make far more efficient transition for a group of people, for the population at large, to access electric vehicles, and also would save the production cost of producing new electric vehicles.
Yeah, we just supply the batteries at the moment, but we do have a company who is a company called RBW Classic, who are building electric versions of kind of historical, famous, MG type cars, and they are doing that. We do get a lot of inquiries from people who want to convert their own car or have a business where they're looking at conversions. So we don't tend to supply those customers unless there is a bit of volume to it, just because we're not set up as we sell to OEMs, not necessarily to the end user, because it's just how we work. So I know, in terms of the conversion that you mentioned, I know the kind of first generation of things like the excavators are definitely an interim conversion compared to what the art of the possible is.
Okay.
Thanks, Simon. And Paula, you had a question.
Yeah, Steve, I'm just wondering, sort of, what do you think an estimated date is for, really big vehicles, the passenger jets and things like that? Do you think it's possible that they'll ever become electric vehicles? And what do you think the timescale would be?
I have no idea. It's probably a project for me to look into it now, is it? We've really not looked at aircraft at all. It's really been behind our kind of initial. The construction sector seems to be the market that's really driven it. So the construction sector have wanted to go electric, and then that's closely followed by things like materials handling, because of all the benefits. It's the quiet, it's the lack of kind of vibration, it's the emissions. So for example, the company Cargo Tech, they had a forklift which had a big customer. I think it was Pets for Homes, and they wanted to do deliveries at night, and also that forklift wanted to go inside. So straight away it pushes them to, it must be an electric one, and it needs a new solution because it doesn't need to lose any of its power. So for us, the whole aircraft side of things has not really been on the agenda. But I do think that when I saw the press release from Turntide, I'm sure they might have mentioned aircraft. So already there seems to be some thinking about it. But from our side here in kind of Washington, we've not really looked into it. I haven't done the research, if I'm honest.
But maybe in a year's time, Steve, when you've invested even further, you can tell us about some of the new things that are going on.
There's so many opportunities. I think we're really lucky that we have got options. We just need to choose the right ones.
Yeah. Okay. There's a few more questions in the chat, but I'm afraid we just start. I'm just conscious of time. So, but I'm sure, Steve, if what I usually do is circulate the contact details for all the speakers. So I'm sure if anyone wanted to connect with Steve, you'd be happy to chat about this a bit more.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Not this afternoon, though. I've got to go to the Lake District this afternoon, but apart from that, yeah.
Right, we'll leave it till Monday then. But again, thanks for that, Steve. That was great.
Okay, thank you.
So you touched there on the issue of not just moving things around, but the sort of the whole infrastructure side. So I'm delighted now to welcome Paula Whitmore from Sir Robert McAlpine, and she's doing a lot of work in that area and has a lot to share with us. So Paula, can I hand over to you?
Yes, thank you very much. I am also going to share my screen and make sure I pick the right one. Can you tell us if it's okay there? Oh, I'm lost.
Oh,
you.
Sorry. Yes. Yeah, we can see that.
Great. Sorry, I can't see you. So if there's anything in the chat, I'm not going to be able to see it. All my screens have rejigged around. So thank you very much, Terry, for inviting me to do the sort of rise and design designing for net zero. So what the sort of tagline was we no longer have any choice, and we have to design stuff that has a zero impact. So what I'm going to talk about is sort of who I am and why I'm here. I'm a civil engineer, so I'm going to explain who civil engineers are and ask the question of, are we the problem or the solution? And then think about what we can do in the future and what we can do now. So who am I? Well, according to the write-up, I am the Institution of Civil Engineers Teesside Chair, which actually I handed over last week. But I am the North East Vice Chair and soon to be Chair of the North East for the Civils. I am a panel chair for the Institution of Civil Engineers flagship proceedings, the Civil Engineering, which is an international journal. I'm also a STEM ambassador, an apprentice ambassador, and I actually recently won the European Women in Construction and Engineering Lifetime in Engineering Award, which makes me feel quite old. So I've done quite a lot of things as a civil engineer, as you can imagine, and also done quite a lot of things as a volunteer and ambassador. So the reason why I'm sort of here today is I've been given the opportunity by Sir Robert McAlpine to be our social value sort of champion on my project. So that allows me to do things like this in works time, which has really opened up an awful lot of doors, and I'm very thankful to my project manager for allowing me to do that. I also help people work towards their professional development in Sir Robert McAlpine, which allows us to embed some of these thoughts and forward-thinking philosophies into sort of the young people and the emerging engineers of tomorrow. But what I'm really here for is because I'm a concerned citizen. The climate crisis and what really is the extinction crisis is absolutely here, and we need to do something about it. So I intend to, in my sort of 10-minute slot, share my enthusiasm for the need for us all to work towards net zero, and I'm going to give you some indications of how civil engineers can help contribute sustainably through the design of the infrastructure of the future. So first and foremost, what are civil engineers? Well, we pretty much have built everything that you need and everything that's built around us. The term that we use, that we normally, excuse me, that we use is that we basically build infrastructure, and they're the basic systems and services. And as Terry explained earlier, it's roads and bridges, but it's actually much more than that. It's your power supplies, it's your water supplies, it's dams, it's everything. It's buildings, it's football stadiums, it's absolutely everything. And it's everything that you absolutely need, and also lots of things that people want. And what we do is we design it, we build it, that's contractors, and that's what Sir Robert McAlpine are in the main. And we also maintain those things. So the project that I'm working on is maintaining the A19. So we're looking after things that already exist. And civil engineers do this all throughout the world, and there's everything, every building that you sat in, every place that you visit has had in some way, shape or form a civil engineer designing, building or maintaining it, all really. So the question is are we the problem or are we the solution? Well, unfortunately, you could argue that we're very much the problem. So if you look at Rachel Skinner's presidential address this year, she's very much focused the Institution of Civil Engineers on zero carbon. And we're very much focused on that. And we totally and utterly have to accept the fact that the evidence is clear that around about 70%, I'll say that again, 70% of the global greenhouse emissions produced every day is traced back to infrastructure across the world, but it's 70%. So that's every single one of our assets, large, small, has a carbon dioxide impact. It's from when it's built, that's an amount of it through the design materials, the construction choices and things like that. But in most cases, it's actually what we do every day. So the things that we are looking at are things that Steve's working on, is looking at what we can actually improve in terms of construction choices. But the everyday is the real thing that's making a difference. And the everyday is because of our carbon hungry behaviours. It's in energy, transport, buildings, water, waste, digital, and everything really. So are civil engineers the problem or the solution? Well, we're sort of both, but equally, so is everybody else. So a key point to note is that engineers build, design, build, maintain things that clients pay for. And clients come in a variety of shapes and sizes. But generally speaking, clients sit under two categories. They're either public clients, which is local authorities, central government, and they very much build what we need, but they also build what we want. Through our democratic processes, we opt, we choose, we vote in our central government, we vote in members on local authorities, and all of that dramatically contributes to what gets built from the public purse. Private clients build things that they think they're going to make money from. And that can be a high-end office building, it can be a metro centre type shopping centre, it can be anything. But basically clients build what the public want. And every single one of us on this call sits in that category. We are the public. So yes, engineers have directly contribute and continue every day to contribute to 70% of the carbon emissions in the environment. However, it all tracks back to what we all want as a society. So thinking about the future, so the Institution of Civil Engineers every year publish something called the State of the Nation, and that's us looking forward, and we say, what are we going to do as a sector? And in 2020, our focus was on infrastructure and the 2050 net zero target. So just thinking of that date for a second, the 2050 net zero target, some people think that's what we should be holding as a date, some people think it should be much sooner. But regardless of when the actual date is, there is a target that we should be aiming for sometime in the future, where we should be looking to work towards net zero. And that means that basically we need to balance what carbon dioxide we've got in the environment, but there's other things as well to consider. And our previous president was Paul Sheffield, and he said, while no one knows for sure what the future will hold, it seems likely our infrastructure systems will need to operate differently going forward. And Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, in his Reith lectures, and if you haven't seen them, I strongly suggest that you do. It is well and truly worth watching all four of them. He very much put engineering in the heart of the solution as well. And he said, to seize this opportunity and solve the climate crisis, we must address three challenges: engineering, political, and financial. So engineering, as I've said, is very much what we build is based upon that political landscape, and you guys have a very large influence on that, larger than you probably understand. And we'll talk about financial and cost a little bit later. But what can we do now? Well, Rachel, our current president, has said we need to get to the point as quickly as possible. We're thinking about carbon dioxide, you know, and we're thinking about it in terms of our design and building operating, so it becomes the norm. And that's what we're doing as civil engineers, and the construction industry as well. And Steve's proven that the construction industry has very much led electric vehicles in terms of all of the things that he showed us, all of the forklifts and things like that. And one of the reasons that we do that is, if you remember back to Steve's squiggly drawing, is we very much think of the problem at the beginning, and we do risk assessments in order to think about how we're going to build things. And that is a massive reason why we're actually leading the change, I think. So looking at a recent blog, one of the things that we absolutely all need to do now is do more collaboration, and that's what the events like this are about. And look as well at our strategies. Unless we have a plan, we're not going to be able to achieve anything. So we need to have a plan, and part of that plan is what other speakers are talking about, which is going to be sort of measuring and thinking about how we actually define things, so we can put it in a strategy to have an actual target. So what's the things in the sort of president's address and the State of the Nation that we're actually looking at? So there's that strategy and policy, and that's very much led by clients, although engineers can absolutely influence it. And one of the projects that the Institution of Civil Engineers have got is Project 13, and that's looking at how we procure things and how we can do things better by thinking about all of these things in the early stages. And the things we've got to think about is like that: eliminate fossil fuels, and Steve's electric vehicles are very much part of that strategy in order to get us to where we need to be. But the word at the top is progressive. And we absolutely need to be progressive. And we also need to accelerate this change. And I'll talk about time in a little bit. So we need to use existing systems, and within that is the energy efficiency and the electric cars that Steve's talking about, but also within that is what Colin's going to talk about as well, which is using digital technologies in order to actually get us to where we need to be. Obviously, the design is something that is well and truly within the engineer's scope of work, and we are very much at every level looking at how we can make the design more energy efficient, more long-term thinking. And the Institution of Civil Engineers as well has introduced some of, in our professional development, the attributes that each emerging engineer has to demonstrate is that they are thinking whole life project, that they are thinking in terms of the sustainability development goals. And we've been thinking like that for a long time, of the whole life cycle in terms of safety for quite some time. The construction design and management regulations came out, and that required us to actually think of whole cycle of a project all the way through to demolition. And we now have to take that way of thinking and make it into more of a net zero approach. And the first question we should really ask, like we do in safety, is, does it need to be built? And obviously the construction, things like looking at not having any wastage, we're very much calculating that now. Have we got substitute materials that lessen the impact on the environment? And one of the well, there's two great big things in construction that are very carbon hungry, which is concrete and steel. But we cannot forget the public. So remember, your everyday choices absolutely make a massive difference. If everybody in the country decided that they were going to leave the car at home and they were only going to travel by cycle, then we would have more cycleways and we would invest less in roads. If everybody chose not to buy lots and lots of stuff that they don't need, there would be far less transport on the roads, and we wouldn't need to increase the capacity. But before I go, let's have just a quick think about two words: cost and time. So what is cost? Well, cost has always been thought of in terms of money. It's a financial cost, but actually we need to change that, and we need to start thinking that what we're doing is totally affecting our world. It's affecting our oceans, it's affecting our forests, and it's ending up that we've got now a lot less fish and a lot more stresses on our plant life. And it's not just fish, it's all life forms. What a lot of people haven't made the link yet is that it's got a direct link to both our food and where we actually live. And there is no doubt in my mind, in many other people's minds, that we're heading towards extinction if we don't make dramatic changes. And the cost is going to have to be, we're going to have to think in terms of life and future on this planet instead of just worrying about money. In terms of time, everyone thinks we've got loads of time. The years 2035, 2050, it's miles off, it's miles off. We've currently set a UK target to reduce our CO2 levels from the 1990 levels by 78% for the year 2035. Sounds like ages away, that, doesn't it? But just think of it in this terms. A baby that was born during COVID will not have left school in 2035. They will be 15 years old. And that really puts it into perspective. Another thing to put into perspective, of the 10-point plan that the government's put forward in order for us to meet that target, 5 of them require engineers to work their magic in order for them to happen. Many of these technologies today do not exist at all, or they do not exist in the scale or the type that we need to actually get us to where we need to be. And Steve's example is exactly it. Great, we've got a lot of smaller stuff working, but actually, are we going to get to jet zero? Are we ever going to be able to put make a Boeing 747 an electric vehicle? But for me, the bigger question is should we? Should we ever be using a Boeing 747? So in order to think about this sort of wider aspects, I've actually set up, and it literally hasn't been launched yet, but Primary Voices with the hashtag and link of Voices 2035. I've loaded up the very first video to date, and the intention is that it'll be shared in schools and other places in order to give those that are going to be affected the most, the young people, an opportunity to raise their voice and make it be heard. So hopefully between us we can actually show other people what good ideas that some have done and share concerns. So I am now going to stop sharing my screen when I find my Zoom, which I can't find, and open to questions. Terry's on mute.
That's the third time today. I really should have got the hang of it by now. Paula, thank you. Can we all show our appreciation for Paula's presentation and call to action? Indeed. I don't think we've got any questions in the chat. Does anyone have a question or a comment or a point they'd like to make? If you would, give me a quick wave. Often when this happens, Paula, it means that you've just blown everybody's minds a tiny bit. We're still struggling to get our heads around it. Graham?
Yeah, just one then, Terry, just to keep things going. Paula, you mentioned at the end there the question of, you know, the Boeing 747 as an EV, and is it actually possible, or even is it worth it? Is the engineering challenge not just the technology, but the perception as well, that people believe that things should be certain ways, even if the engineering doesn't actually back up, shall we say, the hype or the rhetoric?
Well, there's a lot of, so there's two separate things there. One is perception and one is technology, if you like, and the application of technology. So perception is a massive problem. So for example, Steve coming on and saying he's doing all of this great work, if you were of the mindset, and I don't blame people that they are, that they want to think that everything's okay, they'll say, well, why should we do anything? Steve's sorting it all out. So there's that perception. And then there's also the perception of, well, we've worked our way up to this and we've got all of these lovely things, and we actually don't want to lose any of it. We want people to give us replacements for what we've got, and we want to continue as we are. And I'm really, really sorry to tell everybody that is not sustainable. We absolutely cannot we cannot continue to do what we're doing. So all of Steve's stuff, great. So we've got a problem that is this big. Steve's going to solve this amount of the problem, but actually we still need to get further down. So actually not doing and not using what Steve creates at all is going to get us to where we need to be. So we need to reduce what we're doing in everything. Yeah. And then when we have to do the stuff, then we use technology like what Steve's got. We utilize you know, what Colin's going to talk about, the digital technologies in order to maximize our resources and make us more efficient. But we need a measurement, which is what obviously our next speaker is going to talk about. We need to actually understand where we're heading. So that's all about sort of the perception. In terms of the technology, again, a lot of this technology doesn't exist. So one of the key things to do with balancing the books and our carbon budget's actually based on is the fact, and again, a lot of people don't realize this, is a lot of stuff that's up there, we actually need to grab it and remove it. And because even if we reduce by the 50%, we've got too much there. We're relying on the fact that actually we're going to remove a lot of this. And again, a lot of that's down to pinning the hat mainly on carbon capture and storage. And again, that doesn't exist at the moment in the scale that we need it to. Don't get me wrong, there's many people working on it and there's things in the lab that's worked, but actually the scale that we need doesn't exist now. And I'm not suggesting that it won't exist, but the key question is if you were driving a car, right, and you were driving it towards a wall, would you rely on the fact that somewhat time between you and you hitting that wall that somebody was going to invent the technology for you to stop, or would you apply the brakes? And we need to start to apply the brakes. But in order to do that, people need to understand that actually we are driving towards a wall. And it is a balancing act between frightening the living daylights out of somebody and you know, and and trying to get action. But unfortunately, we need to go, I think, further towards the just laying out the facts and actually telling people what stum we're actually in, because unfortunately we are neck deep in it, and many people don't realise at all, even people on this call that are more interested and educated than the general public. It's a bit, so what I've done is I've created this thing in order to, with the intention of showing it to kids, because he's a key fact, right? He's a fun fact. If you present something to 5-year-olds and you present something to CEO, the terminology, the length and the attention span and the content is pretty much
Identical.
the same. Yeah, short, easy to use, straight to the point, no fluff, right? So if you design something that can be taught in primary schools, it's actually good for everybody. So, but again, because there's an awful lot of climate anxiety in the general populace and especially in schools, because they're hearing things, but then nobody knows what to do about it. So I'm in the process of developing this series of things in order to actually give that balance and active fear, but then solutions. And we're all part of the solution, and we all have to be part of the solution. I think I've more than answered your question, Graham. Sorry.
No, that's brilliant. Yeah, exactly. You know, I'll throw the ball up. You just hit it. That's fine. Yeah, that's brilliant. No, I mean,
I didn't see any other questions come up, so.
No, I mean, it's really interesting, Paula. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, Paula. Lots to think about there that we all need to be thinking about. It's not really optional anymore, is it? And you didn't get the details, just drop me a line afterwards, and I'll make sure you get connected. So we've heard from Paula and from Paula about getting some infrastructure things, and from Steve about in many cases large corporates doing amazing things. But you know, as Paula said, it's something that we've all got to do. It's very much we've all got a part to play. And so I'm delighted to welcome Alona from Elevate GM, based in Manchester, who's going to talk to us about the work she does in terms of spreading that message and giving everyone a way to contribute to this global challenge. So Alona, can I hand over to you?
Thanks ever so much. No slides. It's just going to be me having a little chat with you, mainly because the slides that we use to talk about this vary massively depending on who it is that we're talking to. But as Paula alluded to, we are all absolutely part of the problem and all absolutely part of the solution. As Terry says, my name is Ilona, and I now run a business development consultancy called Elevate. But I just wanted to take you back a couple of years first to kind of give you a bit of an understanding as to why we do what we do and where that focus on sustainability has come from. So in my previous role, worked in business development for a Manchester-based organisation, and my role was to run 12 different sector committees. So brought together experts and business leaders in a whole range of different areas, and that could be hospitality, retail, transport, property, healthcare, right across the spectrum. And when I first started working there, those conversations were all very, very different, as you would expect, different focuses for those businesses, different challenges. And then what we really started to notice was sustainability and the green agenda was appearing in all of those committee meetings. It was a focus for a lot of the events that they wanted to pull together. And I started to get little snippets of knowledge and challenges from across those sectors. So a few of the things that really stuck out for me were things like sitting at a sports lunch and having one of the panelists talk around sportswear and clothing, and shared the fact that the fashion industry every single year uses twice the volume of the Mediterranean Sea in fresh water. So the problem that they were looking at wasn't anything to do with playing sport or fan engagement. It was actually how much fresh water was being used in creating those sports kits for people to play in, but also replica kits for fans. So that sustainability started to come into the conversation. In transport and healthcare, there was a real overlap in terms of the issues with clean air. So we've spoken a little bit about electric vehicles today in terms of their carbon emissions, which is hugely important. But also we have to look at NOx emissions and the quality of air that we have. And the quality of air that we have in Greater Manchester because of the traffic is awful. So we have been in breach of NOx emissions every single year since they brought a standard in. To put that into slightly more terms that you can come to kind of imagine, we have schools in Greater Manchester where they can't open the windows because the air quality is too dangerous. Children are only allowed to play outside for 15 minutes because of the impact that that will have on their development. 1,300 people a year in Greater Manchester die because of the quality of air that we have. So they started to become really powerful issues being discussed across every sector. And we started to bring those different sectors together to look at how do we address those problems and what's the overlap that we see in these different areas. So all of those conversations had been going on. And then we went obviously into a pandemic, had been working at a very kind of events-based organisation, and myself and a colleague were made redundant in August, and decided that rather than going and taking a job somewhere else, what we would do would be to set up our own business development consultancy and had some conversations around where our key focuses would be. And based on all of those conversations with businesses, we knew that sustainability had to be there, partly because personally it's something that we're very passionate about, but we could see that going further and further and further up the agenda. It's the issue that companies want to speak to us about. They want to know how they can do better, and they want to showcase what they're doing well. And we've started to notice this kind of three-pronged attack on businesses almost to be more sustainable. Part of that coming from the government, we've spoken about having these 2050 targets nationally. In Greater Manchester, that target is 2038 to be net zero. We're aiming to get there 12 years ahead of the rest of the UK, which is an incredibly challenging target. We then have the consumer angle. So more and more people interacting with businesses are starting to ask the questions around what's your sustainability process? What's your net zero journey? We know that consumers are prepared to pay a premium for more sustainable products, particularly in certain demographics. And then the kind of third element there is looking at it from your employees. We know that people want to work for companies that are more sustainable. They will take lower salaries and they will be more productive in organisations that are perceived as having a strong environmental purpose. And having those kind of three things comes together means that it is no longer something that a business can ignore. It is absolutely on your bottom line. It is something that you're potentially going to have to report to the government on. It is potentially something that your staff and your customers are going to ask questions about. And that's very much the stick end of things. But as we said, where there's challenges, there are opportunities. Because we are looking at hitting those targets, there is an enormous amount of investment coming through from national and local government for people who want to do more in this area, whether that's grant funding, it's access to investment. We're seeing things like a new low carbon hub focusing on hydrogen being set up, all different pockets of activity bringing people together. So there is an opportunity there to go out and win part of that business. The companies that are doing well are attracting the best talent. So they know that they can keep their staff happier and engaged, more productive, and staying with them longer. And that is definitely happening more and more when you look at the younger generation. So one of the things I discovered fairly recently is that the average age of a KPMG employee is 25. The reason for that is that they take on a huge number of graduates, and many of those will move on to smaller firms having done their training with KPMG. They will go on to specialise or to make partner in smaller places. So to actually win that best talent at that kind of, 22, 23-year-old coming out of university looking for their first job, they're having to have conversations around sustainability. They're having to get all the single-use plastics out of their offices to get that talent in. We're seeing people working in comms and PR that have naturally avoided some of the, the tobacco industry and all those kinds of things for some time, are now having similar conversations around sustainability, that if you want to build up your reputation in that area, you don't want it to be doing it with companies that have a very negative impact on the environment. So we kind of got to this point of being, that's great, we can bring people together, we can host conferences, we can help people to raise their profile in that area, doing loads of great stuff, but what's the end result, and how do we know that any of that stuff is making a difference? And I was approached by a man called Phil Corbell, who I sit on the Greater Manchester Green City Comms Board with, and he set up something called the Carbon Literacy Project. And what that project aims to do is to go into all different types of organisations and talk to them around carbon literacy. So understanding what your carbon footprint is, why that matters, what the impact of your behaviour is, but most importantly, what can you do to change that? And so I went through the training last year. We were then accredited to run the training in January, and we put Elevate through the accreditation to become a carbon literate organisation back in February. We've since taken multiple different companies through our training, and that's been everything from hospitality to people at Burberry to Manchester City Council, whole different range of sectors, but that recognise there's more that they can be doing. So I'm not going to attempt to take you through everything that is covered on that carbon literacy course. It's a full day's programme, and there's loads in that. But I suppose kind of some of the highlights that I really wanted to flag up with you now were there's 4 key areas that, whether you look at it individually or from a business perspective, will give you a pretty good handle on what your carbon footprint is. And from an individual level, there's a WWF calculator, which gives you a great kind of high level overview. And it splits it into food, travel, home, and stuff. So food, as you imagine, that is what we eat. There's huge amounts of evidence there that shows that being on a predominantly plant-based diet is the best option for the environment, and with lamb and beef being kind of the worst carbon producers, particularly because they also produce methane, which is one of the key greenhouse gases. From a business perspective, you can see if you're in hospitality, food is your business, so more vegan options, using more sustainable sources would be huge. But actually what we look at is right across the board. What food are you using? What food are you serving in staff canteens? What do you put on if you're running events? What do you have individually to be able to do that? Looking then at travel, your individual travel, can you walk, can you cycle rather than go in a car? One of the most shocking facts that we share as part of that training is that if you look at doing the equivalent of a return journey from London to Glasgow, you can track it out on lots of different options, from cycling it to an electric car, a petrol car, train, coach, SUV and plane. And what almost always comes past when we get people to guess what the worst offender is everyone says, well, it's flying, jumping in a plane, absolutely worst thing that we can do. And compared to pretty much everything else, that is true. But actually, if you have a small car at full capacity, that will outweigh our average capacity on a train and a coach, which is something that's worth thinking about, car sharing and doing that. But by far the worst offender is an SUV. So where a plane on that journey takes around 350 tons of CO2, you're talking about nearly 4 times that to do that journey in an SUV. So it's an absolutely huge difference that when we're talking about, maybe moving people from planes, we need to think about what that backup is, because it's not always that straightforward. The last year or so has proven that we can do a lot of business meetings over Zoom and Teams, and we don't need to be traveling all over the country and around the world to do those. So Zoom is around 10 grams of carbon per person per hour. Compare that to what you might be doing if all of those people are driving across the country to get to a meeting. So think as well at your business travel as well as your leisure. your home, how you heat it, how you insulate it, how it was built. Same thing applies to your offices, and have those conversations with landlords around where your energy comes from. Can you switch over to renewable suppliers? Ask those questions if it's not something that's directly in your control. And then the stuff is the everything else that we buy. So do you need anything at all is a good starting point. Buying smaller amounts of high quality products that will last a long time, things that can be repaired, things that you can use for multiple purposes rather than having specific things for everything that you might need, goes a long way to doing that. So it's just going through that thought process every time. And Paula talked about it, and it's not just swapping what you're doing to a different way of doing it. Quite often it has to be a real behavioural change to stop doing something. And the hierarchy that we talk about is adaptation, mitigation, and offsetting. So if you can adapt and change your behaviour, so not travelling, not buying something, generally doing less and using less will have the most impact. Then mitigating, so things like having that change to the mode of transport will mitigate the impact that you're having if you do need to make that journey. And then as a last resort, the offsetting. So for the emissions that we can't help but produce, how can we offset them? And then have a look at those methods of offsetting. So it can be things where we literally kind of suck carbon out of the atmosphere and do that. And there's some brilliant projects. But there will also be, and airlines have been pulled up on this before, that'll be, I'll offset your flight and we'll plant some trees, but actually all of those trees need to live to be 100 to be able to pull out the amount of carbon that your flight used. And we've got no guarantees that they're going to last 100 years. And we absolutely don't have 100 years to solve the problem. So starting to probe those questions. And then what we really encourage businesses on the course to do is to look at their whole sphere of influence. So what's your relationship with customers, with investors, with employees? How can you support your supply chain to become more sustainable? Because we can't do this in isolation. I can't become carbon neutral on my own. I need to know that everyone who I interact with is doing their part of the journey and understanding the role that I can play as an advisor and as an advocate to help people along that journey. And as I've mentioned, at the end of that course, we ask people to make pledges, and it's the pledge that determines whether or not you're accredited. And you do that on a personal basis and on an organisational basis to commit to a new significant action. Jacobs Engineering have gone through this course for all of their employees, and they went back and tracked all of the pledges that people made, and that showed a 5 to 15% reduction in their carbon footprints as a result of doing that course. And that seems to play out across all the different organisations that do it. So it's a course that I would obviously massively recommend you getting involved in, but just actually going through that thought process, what activities am I undertaking? What's the impact of those activities, and what can I do to change, will have that huge impact. Because as we said multiple times today, we all have to change our behaviour. We all have to start doing it now. It's already too late to undo the damage that we've done. So we need to look at how can we minimise the amount of damage that we're going to cause. I've seen a few questions pop up in the chat, so we'll bob onto those on a second. But the last point that I kind of wanted you to think about is we're in an incredibly privileged position here in the UK. We do not see the impact of climate change in anything like the most extreme way, but we are absolutely one of the worst polluters. And that idea of climate justice is something that we need to start taking very, very seriously. We're starting to see the impact here in the UK. Over the last couple of years, we've seen fires on the moors, we've seen increased flooding, we're starting to see, homes and properties being displaced, we're starting to see disruption to our global supply chains. But if you look at what's going on in the rest of the world, we've got islands that are going to end up completely underwater. We've got species that are dying out. We have famine caused by climate change. We have wars caused by climate change. That is all going to increase. And we know that countries like Rwanda, their annual carbon footprint is roughly average to a week of what we create in the UK. So that difference in what we do is absolutely huge. So as much as you're starting to see these things around you, do look out a little bit broader in terms of what the global position is, and then bringing that back to home. We talk about this idea of, you know, fuel poverty and people choosing between, you know, heating and eating. You know, people who are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, who have a huge other challenges, they don't have the same privileges that a lot of us on this call do to make those switches over to more sustainable products, to invest in more expensive products that will last us for longer overall, which for me means that if we are in a position where we have that privilege to be able to make those choices, there is far more of a responsibility on us to lead that change than leaving it with the people who are already suffering more of the consequences. So that's it for me as a bit of a whistle-stop tour of what we're doing. I'll bring the chat up now, and we'll scroll back a little way and hopefully pick those up, but do shout up. So
that's brilliant. Can we just say thank you, Ilona, first? That was fabulous. Thank you. So Paul, I think you had a couple of points you wanted to make. Is that right?
Yeah, so first of all, I've got to say that was brilliant. Putting things into perspective and actually acknowledging our privilege is a massive part of the issue, and part of the solution. And I love the pledge requirement, because I personally, and I think many people on the call, has probably realised that we've talked for too long and too much without any action, and we just don't have that time to waste. But my question for you was, so things like food stuff shows calories and fat content and things like that, you know, red, amber, green, you very clearly can see what you're looking at, although some of us might choose to ignore it. But what do you think the chances are of having similar labels on all sorts of things that's more of a sustainability sort of angle? And the follow-up question is who would lead that cause?
So honestly, I think the chances of it happening at any scale are minimal. There is a huge cost involved in labelling produce and working that out, and we're seeing that play out at the moment in the kind of, should we be putting calorie and nutritional content on, you know, restaurants, and is that a cost that they can bear? So I don't see it as something that will be coming through anytime soon. I would love to see it in some ways. I think if, you know, we had, you know, clearer labelling on what's air freighted would be really useful. I don't think there's any real indication from government that they will drive that forward. But what I think we will see is certain brands, certain supermarkets starting to push that kind of off their own back. So, for example, if you saw the orangutan advert talking about palm oil, which then led to kind of Iceland saying like none of their own products contain palm oil now. It's never quite as straightforward as that. What we shouldn't be doing is stopping using palm oil, because palm oil is actually a very, very effective way of using land to get oil. And if we stop using palm oil, we will just grow something else that uses up even more land to do that. What we need to be doing is using responsibly sourced palm oil and managing that process. So there is a danger in being a bit too black and white on that stuff. But you will see more and more retailers start to say, you know, these products are locally sourced. We'll see restaurants that say, you know, everything that's on the menu was sourced within a particular radius of the restaurant. We will look, I think, at more retailers saying that they won't use anything that's air freighted, and looking at promoting more of those kinds of, you know, those vegan plant-based options, not just from a kind of a health or, you know, ethical animal rights point of view, but also as being like, this is the more sustainable option because they know it's where their customers are. But I don't see it being a big change to bring in that regulation. I think with everything that we're seeing going on with Brexit and COVID at the moment, the idea of putting an additional challenge in front of retailers and hospitality is going to be a long way off. Does that answer your question all right there?
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah,
Thanks,
the answer I was expecting, but not the answer that I think we need.
One thing that I would flag is there's a brilliant book called How Bad Are Bananas? So this is written by the guy that had his brother not literally invented the internet, would be the overachiever in the family. It's a guy called Mike Berners-Lee, and he's been climate change activist for a long time. And this book How Bad Are Bananas is essentially the carbon footprint of everything, and you can go through that, and that will give you ideas about what are the best options. And that's where a lot of the stats come from food and for travel, and it's that balance that we can kind of say that's great, rather than eating beef I'm going to eat lentils, or whatever that choice is, but also ties in if it's air freighted and highly packaged and processed, that idea of a plant-based diet and an omnivore diet become much closer together, because we're actually adding in a lot of carbon footprint. We'll be in a position where tomatoes from Spain in the winter have a lower carbon footprint than tomatoes in Britain, because they will have been forced to grow, and we use a lot of electricity to be able to heat them and do that, where on the face of it, it's a local tomato, it's from Britain, therefore it's a lower carbon footprint than one from Spain. It's kind of unpicking some of that stuff that's going on.
Thank you.
Fab, thanks. There's a couple more questions, but I'm just conscious of time and I don't want to take up anyone's lunchtime. But as with the other speakers, we'll circulate Alona's details, and I'm sure she'd be happy to have a chat with anyone who's interested in knowing more. So again, Alona, thank you for that. It's fabulous. And then finally, we don't want to leave the we've heard about infrastructure and batteries and things, but we don't want to leave the digital world out. So Colin is going to give us a quick example of what they're doing in terms of making a contribution towards this whole move towards net zero. So Colin, over to you.
Thanks, Terry. I'll see if I can share my screen, because I'm also used to Teams and not Zoom. There we go.
That's coming up. Yeah.
Okay, so as Terry said, for you that don't really know me, I'm Colin Kelly. I'm the owner of Mad Digital. I don't know what's going on. There we go. The agency's been around 25 years. I set it up really straight coming out of university from Newcastle. And since then, we've worked with 30 plus in the top brands. Some of our apps and some of our experiences that we've created for our clients have spanned over sort of 40 countries. So we've kind of been around the mill, seen things come and go. We've seen technology come and go. And our challenge has always been to look at the experience or the information that clients are getting or consumers are getting, rather than necessarily the tech that it's delivered on, which has served us quite well, which is why we've been around so long. We've worked with quite a lot of brands over that time. Some of them that we've kind of put on this board is just sort of call outs to show like a breadth of different type of people we've worked with, whether they've got challenges in store right the way through to challenges on education and how to disseminate certain information across. We originally cut our teeth in producing what was called the Pantene Sonic Comb. It was for a hair care brand, and we come up with the analogy that if you put a microphone through somebody's hair, the amount of noise or reverb it made is an indication of damage to the hair. So that way, we kind of worked with their team to develop the Sonic Comb that actually analysed that data as it went right through someone's hair. The woman then in store could see how damaged her hair was through to tip. And then obviously brand could then use that to say, like, if you use this product and come back in a few months' time, we'll do the same test and you'll see a great improvement. It was one of our first ways of looking at sort of say raw data and how that information could be adapted or changed to make it very sort of almost like taking ownership to the consumer in store. That moved us on to work with people like Braun, where they were very interested in how this type of information could be used for male grooming, and in terms of how they can really then show that they're experts in the field. So in this particular project, we actually attached a macro lens to an iPhone, and we worked with Teesside University, and we were able to diagnose, by putting this on different parts of the skin, we were able to then analyze sort of your average beard length, your beard direction, your hair thickness, and then reiterate that information back to the consumer in an engaging manner, so that we could really educate them about their face, and then also potentially what type of products they should use that was really personalized to them. So that was kind of, I feel like that was our bread and butter. We had a lot of experience in that field, and we must have been in that field for around about 20 years. We still are, we're still very active in that space. But we started to look at how this sort of analogy could be applied to different sectors. And we answered a challenge that Siemens brought up, which is the purpose of really of this talk. They were very interested. They were doing a great piece of work with Kiel University. And Kiel University, their campus, they were looking at becoming carbon neutral by a set date. I think it's 2030. And they brought in Siemens to like help manage that transition and look at their efficiency of their buildings and what sort of technology they could bring in to help them achieve this, to make their buildings as efficient as they could be and to control the grade. And when they introduced new elements, how could that look? Which is what Siemens are really good at. The problem that they faced was how to then disseminate this information, how to get people on board. Siemens were reporting to us like, this is the type of information they would display. So it was very, very graph orientated, very, very high analytics. And kind of a lot of people just didn't obviously get it. If you weren't in the field, you might necessarily be able to interpret these graphs. So they were getting a lot of expressions like this during the meetings, like, we don't really understand this. People were kind of switching off, sort of losing interest in it, right the way through to some of their information's being in panels, being described as like finding a sort of needle in the haystack, because the panels were so complicated, the information was so complicated, people couldn't siphon their way all the way through them. So they set this challenge out to the sectors, or various sectors, and said, what could you do? So we took the approach of, well, maybe how could we start to visualize this data in the XR field? How could we maybe bring it into virtual reality or augmented reality? And what could that data look like? And how could we get that information across? So essentially we went through this process with them and we won the pitch, and we essentially presented to them creating an augmented reality digital twin of the whole campus. So the idea here was this campus could be projected anywhere in the world by anybody, and they could get a good snapshot of where the campus was the previous 24 hours in terms of what their buildings were doing and what benefit the send information was given to it. So this is a challenge in its own right. We looked at the campus. We built a whole virtual campus space. So the number of buildings were correct, the land space, the scale was correct. So that's kind of one of our big starting points, is we built a whole, in a game engine, a whole replica of the campus. And then for this particular building, only certain buildings were initially connected by send. So the idea is here is over time, we'll keep changing some of the buildings, so the buildings are connected in the AR space once they're connected through the Siemens space. So we went and actually looked at what it would mean to create a virtual twin and how people would maintain ownership of that. So instead of just giving them a graph of the library, we went away and said, well, if we're doing an augmented reality version of the library, can it just be a white block? Can it just be a white block that says library? And that didn't test very well. People didn't sort of really gain any ownership of it, didn't feel anything towards it. To them, it was just a white block that basically said library. So then the next test was, does it just resemble the shape and have basic colors to it? And again, that proved that tested a little bit better. But then the next level that we took it to was this particular ones that you see now, where we actually sent drones up and we took around about 1,000 pictures each building and give them almost like a photogrammetry realism, slightly scaled down one of their buildings. And then we found people really, really connected to people inside the campus could really like sort of, if you like, gain ownership of the library, understand that that was the student union, that was Kiel Hall, and you could see it very, very straight-handed. It almost was a one-to-one. So then we found a way that we could sort of gain this connection, so people could look at it and gain ownership of that building. The next level was to look at sort of some of their information that Kiel sort of wanted to portray and what that meant. So we started to do almost like you might do in a game engine, where we started to overlay these small bits of data when you looked at a building from a distance. So it kind of looked where your camera was, what part of the building you were looking at, and then just give you a top level snapshot of information. So it was almost like, we know you're looking at us, you're still a little bit far away, so we'll just give you a snapshot of, this is how much energy I've used over the past 24 hours, and this is the percentage that's come from renewable energy. And these bars would link in with each other. So if Keel's using a lot more energy, its bar would be bigger than, say, maybe the library, for argument's sake. So that very, very snapshot, as you're moving around the campus, you can see very, very quickly if a particular building was using more energy than you thought, or potentially using less of the renewable source than you potentially thought. And we could highlight little indicators. So if there's something that was set outside of their norm, the icons wouldn't be orange, they would be red, almost as an indicator to say, you might need to look at this building, there might be something, there might be an issue here. We still had to bring in a certain level of graphs in, but we tried to combine data to make it very, very visual, almost like a snapshot. So very quickly from this graph, you can almost see if there's a pattern over the past 24 hours of where the energy was used, what percentage of it was renewables, and what percentage of that energy at the top was saved by using Siemens Send system. On the left, we tried to then portray that in a slightly different way. So we tried to give you some top level stats. So on the left, we talked about the amount of energy that was saved through using the Siemens system and the amount of carbon that was saved. But we didn't feel that was enough. So we essentially then tried to equate that to something that was more meaningful to the general public, or to the general consumer that was looking at this. So for argument's sake, in the energy one, we looked at saying, well, that energy saved is equivalent to charge an electric car and travel 30 miles. So it was tried to sort of tie in the electricity theme to say, well, okay, the amount of energy we've saved, you could have traveled 30 miles in an electric car. And we also tied that analogy back to carbon. So we were kind of like, well, on your carbon saved, that's equivalent to how many miles of an average car. So it was really to sort of maybe sort of essentially give you a connection to like, well, you know, I've saved so much carbon, so what does that mean? So it's to try and tie in that analogy. Since then, what we found is once we've done this and released it to Keel, they're starting to come back to us and ask questions of like the student unions or the student accommodation. Since they've started to play this with this tool, have asked for things like, can they do a leaderboard? Can they start to show if one particular part of the campus is more efficient than another, or one student hall is more efficient to the other, and sort of then maybe encourage a bit of competition between the two, which is great for carbon neutral, but it's a sense of, we found that now they've got this tool, this information that's been very, very technical and very, very high level, and maybe even locked off to a general student, is now accessible to them, and they can see it in a very, very, you know, you can start this app up every day and just check how the campus is doing overall and their buildings that they're using is doing. So it's become a very, very accessible tool. Which kind of led us on to a next thing that Siemens asked us to look into. And we pitched them back to them a carbon zero war room. So it's to try and take this method, if you like, a step further. So what happens if we took some of these analogies or learnings away from a campus, and let's look at it UK based and potentially world based. But essentially it was like, wouldn't it be really cool that if we had sort of this carbon zero war room where we can take a lot of these little different a lot of these different data platforms, a bit like when you're making something or putting ingredients together on a cake by themselves, they don't necessarily mean a lot. So if they had a lot of stats on number of car charge points, had a lot of stats on how much carbon each area was using, and all of these things were kind of available, but essentially they were all a little bit not as meaningless, but not as strong just by themselves. So they kind of give us this analogy of like, well, what can you do with it? So we kind of then put it to this and said, well, if we put the right ones together, it could probably produce you something that's quite magical at the end and quite meaningful at the end. Although it's stacked on different data layers, the end result is more pleasing than what you started with. So we kind of come up with this analogy for them of being able to portray these data layers more in the immersive space. So we said to them, well, wouldn't it be great that if we could bring a lot of this data into VR so that you at any time had your carbon zero war room with you? It isn't a physical room. It isn't something where someone has to go. They can literally put on a headset and then bring up areas of the UK, bring up areas of movement, or bring up areas of carbon. And the long-term vision was to be able to say, well, could we then run simulations? Could we put it into schools so that schools could then educate with what they do? So if they look at their school and their surrounding area, what happens if they all walk to school instead of getting dropped off? What would that mean in terms of, which has been mentioned before, their air pollution, in terms of what carbon saving would that mean? Could we do things that would encourage one school to compete with other schools, or regions to compete with other regions? But it's in a form that's then more meaningful or accessible to the masses, rather than necessarily what we tend to see at the moment is a lot of potentially buzzwords and potentially graphs and things of this nature, which to the general public is a little bit maybe hard to understand, but if they could even go to a library and start to experience this and see what was happening, it might be a nicer way to sort of encourage them to do their bit and gain more sort of momentum in the space. So really today was just to let you know kind of what we've been working with on Siemens, kind of our thoughts of maybe how XR or this type of new sort of augmented reality virtually can play a space in this, not necessarily in terms of in its own nature reducing carbon, but the fact that with different way we can portray this information or then help people gain a connection to it might in itself, then more people should hopefully take ownership and do their bit a little bit more. So it was really just to kind of finish today's talk off with almost like saying there is a need still for, we still need to look quite closely on how we disseminate this information or how we portray this information or how we can engage people to do their bit in this space. And it was kind of one of those key things that we didn't see it in the talk, so we just asked Terry if we could come along. So that is it. That is me today.
Thanks for that, Colin. And once again, in the usual manner, and you're right. The more ways we can share that information and make it real to people, the more likely it is that things will change, I guess. So fabulous, right? Well, I think we've all learned something today. We've all been inspired, frightened a little bit, but that was probably the point. So let's start this weekend and the rest of our lives really trying to make a difference, because every little bit will indeed help. So a huge thank you to the 4 speakers we've had today. Before I finish off, we've got, I think there's only one person actually who wants to do a quick pitch. So Graham, can I hand over to you for 2 minutes to tell us, well, whatever you like, really.
Is this the right Graham? Because there was a couple of Grahams in me.
No, yes, it's definitely you. Yeah.
Hi everyone. Thanks Terry. I really enjoyed all the speakers today. It was I learned loads today. Graham Nicholson. We're a foreign exchange specialist up in the northeast. I think we're one of many. I think the only one up here. So I'm quite proud of that. We're a global company, but I am based up in sunny Newcastle. So basically, at the end of the day, we're about 2% cheaper than banks. It's all through Barclays, but I work with a lot of importers and exporters. But one of the main things I wanted to say was, because of all the things I hear with shipping, and we can hedge rates, we can hedge foreign exchange rates, any currency pairs out to, we used to do 2 years, but because of the volatility, it's out to 1 year at the moment. No one's really forecasting past that. We're able to lock rates for companies, and it's really useful when you've got shipping delays, and we can roll the contracts out, we can bring them forward. So it's a really useful tool for companies for their balance sheets, and a lot of people are coming to us because we have got the flexibility, and the banks don't really want to handle that. But we're specialists, and this is all we do, as well as being your eyes and ears in the currency markets. So we're just basically a one-stop shop. We're very specialized, and we just basically look after the company's cash flows, which in this year is probably one of the key things our companies are looking at. So if anyone wants to find anything more, give us a shout, or just come and say hello. I'd be really interested to have a chat, and thank you very much. Cheers.
Thanks for that, Graham. Thank you. So I'm just going to spotlight myself again. There we go, and turn my projector back on. There we are. So as I said at the beginning, that's why we do this, and that's why I'm assuming you all come along to these things, and hopefully that some of the things that you've heard about today will have made some of these things a bit more of a reality for you. So in terms of Design Network North, you're all part of Design Network North now, whether they like it or not, because it certainly isn't about me. But what I have the great privilege of doing is some of these things. It's my role is to sort of support the network, encourage collaboration, create opportunities for collaboration, like the things we've done today. But giving assistance as well. So if you need some help with something or some advice, or you need a contact, then do drop me a line. It's about sharing knowledge, again through things like this. But also, if you've got some amazing knowledge to share, then let me know, and we can really build a future event around that. And then it's about raising the profile of the importance of design, raising the profile of this region, because it's amazing. But also maybe helping you raise your profile as well. So one of the things that we do, and as I said earlier, have done for the last 12 years, are these Rise and Design events. So that's where you've been this morning. In July, we're going to be looking at, I suppose, a similar area, really designed for good. So those things that have been developed for maybe for charitable purposes or to kind of make a big difference in the world, make the world a better place kind of thing. So we've got a few things lined up for that. I've said there we're going to be probably on Zoom. I think that is the case. But maybe for the one in September on the 10th, as well as being over to you. So if you've got some ideas for things that we should cover, let me know. And you never know, we might actually be able to meet in person. Let's see. All that information on all of those things is on the website, as well as there's a news page. So if you've got some stories you want to share or some events coming up or anything really, let me know. We can include you on that. Designerworknorth.org is the place to be. So today's event has been sponsored jointly by the Supply Chain Northeast programme, which is one of the business support programmes run by RTC North. They've asked me to mention a big event they've got on the 8th of July. It's called Showcase Northeast, and the idea is, as the name suggests, to showcase some of the amazing things going on in the Northeast, but not just as a kind of a flag waving exercise, as a way for you to find out more about what's going on, make some connections, find out what trends are in the various industries. We've got 25 or so speakers from a whole host of different industries. We're looking for getting on for 1,000 delegates. We've also got some exhibition spaces as well. So the information, it's already live, so you can register for that. I'll send some information out about that on the early next week. And if you want to get involved, I would strongly suggest that you do. The other program that is sponsoring this event is the Innovate UK Edge program, and that gives support to SMEs across the north. Anyone who's doing something new, something innovative, and that can be internal things as well as creating new products and services. You can get a lot of support from a broad range of people with expertise in lots of different sectors, and it's all fully funded through Innovate UK. So if you're doing something new and you want some help, you want an extra pair of hands, then that would be a really good thing to get involved in. And again, I'll send you some information on that. A couple of things that are coming up. So this is a series of events that the KTN have been running since April, I think. It's about once a month. I don't know where they got that idea from. But navigating the design to manufacturing journey. So the next one is, I'm trying to read it there, 23rd of June. They're really good. It's a similar format to this. So they have a couple of speakers and then time for networking, but it attracts the right sort of people, if you know what I mean. So if you want to learn something, but also connect with people, I would strongly suggest you get there. So that the next one, when's that? Week after next? Is that next one? And then there's something coming up from the Rural Design Centre. Those of you who were here last month will remember we heard from what they're doing. And Stuart English, who's part of that, has got some workshops coming up, how design-led innovation can benefit your business. But as far as I know, it's not just for rural-based businesses. And so if that's something you're interested in, again, as I say, there'll be more information on its way to you. This is just something I ran last week. Last week. It was a workshop around helping companies to think about what their future workplace is going to be. A lot of us are starting to think about moving back to offices and bringing people back and hybrid work and all that kind of stuff. So I did a session using Lego Serious Play, and we had about half a dozen businesses there. And then for some of them, I'm doing some one-to-one sessions with them. But if that's of interest to anyone, let me know, and we can maybe see if we can arrange something, something for you. The Northumbrian Water Innovation Festival is coming around again. I know it's a long way off. It's not till October, but I wanted to give you advance warning because it's a fantastic few days. It's online again, as it was last year, but I was involved last year and it was just as good online as it was in person. So that's something that is really worth getting involved in, either as a contributor, and I'm sure they'll be looking for welcome contributions, or as a delegate. And then there's something that we're launching next month. So we're working with the Tynemouth Volunteer Life Brigade, who aren't the RNLI, as many people think. They're a local charity based in Tynemouth. They were the first in the world to save people at sea. And then the RNLI got the idea and copied them. But unlike the RNLI, they don't have huge amounts of income. So we're helping them to identify new ways to raise funds. And one of the things we've come up with is a design challenge, because they've got huge amounts of history and heritage, and things that could be used to inspire products, whether that's clothing related things, whether it's craft beers and spirits, or whether it's homewares using some of the iconic imagery and heritage of the organisation. So we're holding an open day in July, 14th of July, where you can come along to the Watch House, as you can see there, talk to some of the guys, see some of the stuff they've got, and then if you come up with an idea for a product that you want to make, they will license to you whatever it is that you need in return for a share of the profits. So that's coming up next month. But if you've got any thoughts on that and you want to have an initial chat about it, happy to do that. And then finally, we've got the Design Means Business Conference. That's something that we ran for a couple of years. First one was about 10 years ago now. We've put them all online. So if you want to hear from designers from Aston Martin, from Orange, from Nokia, from Microsoft, from a whole range of different global businesses, we've got some brilliant talks there. As I say, it's all online now on Vimeo. So you just register in the same way that you do for this, and then you can watch at your leisure. So that's it from me. Thank you all for coming. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm sure you've all learned something. I certainly have. Have a great weekend, and I'll hopefully see you all again next month.
Thanks,